So my last video, I called Megyn Kelly a racist because she said that Jesus and Santa were white. Now, I have seen some pictures like Real History WW shows St. Nick, but I was mostly focused on Jesus, and I showed some of the old pictures of Jesus, and I gave the old description from Josephus. But I never fact-checked it. I never fact-checked the description. I didn't fact-check the pictures. Now I fact-checked it, and we'll get into what the results say. One thing I'll say, though, Megyn Kelly is still a racist. I'm not a Christian. I don't know that Jesus existed. But if the oldest description of Jesus is authentic, then the possibility of his existence is stronger. First heard the description of a black Jesus on Rass Kass's album, Soul on Ice, in the song Nature of a Thread.
Peep the description of a story in Josephus, short, dark, with an underdeveloped beard was Jesus.
Obviously, the source would then be Josephus, right? But that's not what I found. It's not that simple. While researching this source, I discovered Heath Henning and his website, Truthwatchers. Heath Henning is a minister who examined Josephus's description of a black Jesus, and he makes a fundamental mistake in his research. Then he makes more mistakes, and there are a bunch of contradictions and logical fallacies, so I'll examine his many mistakes. And I will do it in the name of Jesus, with love. I figure he has a site called Truthwatchers. If it's in error, then he would appreciate being corrected. As I correct Truthwatchers, I'm also going to focus on the source for a black Jesus, and you'll see what I mean when I say that it's not that simple. Because the source doesn't just say that Jesus is short, dark, with an underdeveloped beard. It also says he was mature age, hunchback, had prognathism, a long nose, and a unibrow. It kind of reminds me of the Beetlejuice Buddha. Heath's article, which I'll link, it first examines Revelations, where Jesus has hair like lamb's wool and skin of bronze. This is dismissed as being luminescent, like burning bronze, and white like wool instead of Afroic like wool. And I'm not sure if the Bible means burnt bronze or burning bronze. Either way, I don't think anything can be gained from this quote in Revelations. I try to read or listen to Purdam Haru, also known as the Book of the Dead, and this sounds like flowery, fanciful religious speech. It sounds like Holy Ghost speech. They had this in the Book of the Dead a few thousand years before Christ, and it's still the same manner of speech. It didn't change that much. One thing that I did gain from the passage is Heath was responding to black people, and either they or both did not define what he or they actually meant by black. So if Heath wants to respond after thanking me for correcting him and all that, and he said, you know, in the process of correcting me, you made some mistakes, you were in error, we need to be on the same page. We need to be talking about the same thing. So we need to define what black is, because obviously nobody's born with labels that say what they are. This is all stuff that people made up relatively recently in different iterations. So many different iterations that it's necessary for me to define it. Now, the simple way to define it is, do you look like someone who's classified as black in a nation that has a defined black race? When I say that Jesus was black or wasn't black, that's what I mean. Do you look like someone who is black? When I say in previous videos that Egyptians were black, that's what I mean. Not that they actually created Negro colored black. Like if you look at Franklin amongst the other kids right here, his facial features don't matter. And I use this example with the Egyptians. They depicted themselves in a way that would be classified as black, like Mustafa Hefni. You look up the video on Mustafa Hefni. He's an immigrant from Egypt. He came to America and he realized that he looked like the people who were classified as black, yet he didn't qualify for any of the benefits, yet he was receiving all the racism once he decided that he was going to classify himself as black, because he just didn't look like a person who wouldn't be. And he recounts how people turned on him. They threatened him. He was denied promotion. They told him when we see black people come into our neighborhoods, we call the police. Even to this day, like, or at least from 2012, I think he's still doing it. He's petitioned Obama to be classified as black. He said, I'm experiencing the effects of racism, but I'm not eligible for any programs. And truthfully, I think he was just doing that to make a point. America's trying to tell him he's white. This dude with the fro, by my definition, Hefney is black. By your definition, Hefney is black. If Jesus looked like Hefney, Jesus is black. By my definition, black albinos are not black. You don't see a black woman in this picture, but there is an African woman, Miran Binti. But if Jesus is black on a TV show, she can't be his mama. I mean, she can be his mama if you want to be ultra liberal or whatever, but if you want to be gritty, realistic, you know, it's up to you. Because they don't have, you don't even have to be dark. All of these folks are black. You have West African / ADOS on the left. You got East African on the right. They were all 92 depending on the test, because I think home team, he had one test where that was higher than the other. But they were all 92% or more African. I'm darker than all of them. My tests are 62 to 68% African, depending on the test, like I said, with them. I would argue that Atlas Mountain Berbers are white Africans. I'll get into this more in my next video if you're interested. And I'm talking Atlas Mountain Berbers. I know there are other Berbers. I know there are black Berbers. The bulk of their ancestry, like the main stalk, is Tuareg, and that's where you have the black Berbers predominantly. And again, this is my definition, which is pretty broad and loose. But I'm getting to the parameters. My point is that Atlas Mountain Berbers are African, they're white. You have West Asians that would be considered black. You have East Asians who would be considered black, because we're going by appearance. Kamala would be considered black. Can you tell if this is her real sister or a sorority sister? In some respects, her mama would be considered black. If all you need is a wig and a mustache to go from black to Indian, like Key and Peele, or all you need is a fade because you think you can get a premium affirmative action package, or maybe you're just trolling. I don't know this story, but this is my point. Indians, by my standard, a lot of them would be black. And there's a range of phenotype, like Zoe Saldana. She shouldn't have played Nina Simone. You know, there's colorist and featurist issues, and usually I don't agree that much with that, but if they make this point with Zoe playing Nina Simone, they're right. There's a range of white too. So there's no true Negro, because Nicole Polizzi, she would be considered white. No true albino. Also, this has nothing to do with how people classify themselves. If Miran wants to be black or Kamala wants to be Afro-Asiatic, it has nothing to do with their definition. This is, if you're drawn up like this in a book, or we see someone who looks like you in a TV show, or in artwork, ancient artwork. And I need to be clear and exhaust this, because this is one of the main things that Heath gets wrong. So I'm reading from Heath. Okay, this is me reading from Heath. Other texts provided specifically dealing with Christ's complexion was from the old Slavonic version of Josephus. The email I received mentioned this, said Josephus, in the unaltered old Slavic Russian version of his work, said Jesus Christ had dark skin or was black skin, depending on how people have translated the original version. Black people have always been associated with being darker skinned. White people do not have dark skin, they only get tanner. Pause. I'm going to insert pauses when I stop reading. I have to do this because a lot of times Henning quotes someone, and since I'm quoting him by reading him, this is like me quoting a person who's quoting a person, so I got to pause, or else I figure it'll get confusing. An emailer defines black as dark skin and white as not being dark skin. I showed you a white woman who, by comparison, is dark skinned, darker than a person who would be classified as black. So I think dark skin versus tanning is subjective. Now, when I was reading this for the first time, I was agreeing with Heath. The Revelations entry seems like Holy Ghost writing, and the emailer does a lousy job of defining black. But things really start to go left for Heath. So back to Heath. One of the websites propagated by a black Jesus commented on the text. In 1931, the biblical scholar was able to translate the text of the ancient Roman historian Josephus. The text described the appearance of Jesus as witnessed by the ancient Roman historian Josephus. Before we look at the text, note that the website calls Josephus an ancient Roman historian twice. So the author of the website, Addison Starter, doesn't even realize that Josephus was a historian, not a Roman. Was a Jewish historian, not a Roman. This causes to question immediately whether the author is personally familiar with Josephus. Pause again. This is his second mistake. This is not the big one though, but he kind of glossed over because it said in 1931 the biblical scholar was able. He didn't focus on that enough because that was the confusion that he has behind the source and why I say it's not that simple. But if you're going to sound snobby, you can't be wrong, or you're going to look like a fool. Josephus was a Roman national, thereby a Roman historian. This is basic Wikipedia. You can be Jewish and Roman at the same time. One is a religion, the other is a nationality. In the next part, you need to listen close, though, because this is where Heath makes a critical mistake. And it also alludes to why I was saying the source is not that simple. So back to Heath. The email I received called the text of Josephus the unaltered version. Textual scholars such as F.F. Bruce, who was Ryland's professor of textual criticism and exegesis, the University of Manchester, refer to the Slavonic Old Russian version of Josephus, 11th and 12th century. It's too full of historical errors to receive serious consideration. Elsewhere, he states specifically of the passage referring to Jesus in the Slavonic version that it has no substantial claim to authenticity. Robert E. Van Voorst discussed the Slavonic testimonium. Josephus could only identify two scholars willing to argue for its authenticity, concluding scholars have almost unanimously rejected the authenticity of the Slavonic testimonium, and most believe with Paul Winter that it is even later that present from the main testimonium. I have presented evidence in a previous article why the received Greek text, Josephus's reference to Jesus, is original and authentic text. The Slavonic version is known to be the worst corrupted text of Josephus. Pause. He says the email he received was about the unaltered version. Then he makes a case against the altered version, citing scholars who question its authenticity and consider it corrupt. Again, this is a miscommunication, but this is all Heath's fault. You'll see why in a second. So back to Heath, okay? The quote offered by Black Jesus advocates is as follows. At the time, also there appeared a certain man of magic power, if it be meet to call him a man. In brackets they put whose name is Jesus, whom, in brackets, certain Greeks call son of, in brackets, a god, but his disciples, in brackets, call the true prophet, who is supposed to have raised dead persons and to have cured all diseases. Both his nature and his form were human, for he was a man of simple appearance, mature age, black skin, in parentheses it's melagchrous, short growth, 3 cubits tall, hunchback. Pause. I already read this, so we'll skip forward a little bit. I'm going to skip forward. Back to Heath. We're getting there. But having a line in the middle of the head after the fashion of the Nazaraeans with an underdeveloped beard. Halosis 2:174, and it gives a source. There are a number of issues with this quote is cited. First, the source references Halosis 174 is inaccurate. Halosis is a Greek word meaning captured. This is supposed to be Old Slavonic language, not Greek. Secondly, the actual reference to Christ in the Slavonic Josephus in the book Jewish Wars. When I plugged the quote into a search, it only provided the website stating Jesus is black. This is a little suspicious. Pause. It's not suspicious. He doesn't get it. The earliest surviving copy of Josephus is from like Slavonic Josephus is from like 1463. I think he mentioned a date that might have been earlier or later. We're talking medieval Holy Roman Bohemian Empire. We're talking late stage Roman Empire. Josephus lived in 70 AD during the Greco-Roman pagan phase of the Roman Empire. Very early, different age. And Heath knows this. The primary, or at least a copy of the primary in question, would be in Greek. Thus, you have the title Halosis and the total source, 2nd 174, meaning capture, because it refers to the capture of Jerusalem, which is what Josephus wrote about. Let me repeat this. They gave him the source, and it's in Greek. You should expect it to be in Greek. The source is Halosis 174, meaning captured, because it refers to the capture of Jerusalem. I can see why he got confused, but still, this is his mistake. This is the original uncorrupted that they were talking about. It was rewritten and allegedly corrupted in Old Slavonic more recently. He was given the primary and he dismissed it because it was referenced by black people. I mean, that seems to be, he said he searched and that's where he only found references by black people. It's a quote saying Jesus was black. Who do you think is going to reference it? Do you think white people are going to be all over that quote? Well, actually a few do. And I'll get to that in a moment, but for now, back to Heath. Thirdly, the quote, as provided above, is not even about Jesus. However, the name Jesus is inserted to brackets, indicating it is not the original source, but provided by the person citing the text. Pause. That's Jesus. I don't see how a Christian would say that someone who lived during the time of Pilate, raised the dead, cured disease, performed magical feats, was called the Son of God, had disciples, opposed certain laws, and didn't keep the Sabbath, parted his hair like a Nazaraean, but that wasn't Jesus. Was everybody doing that back in the days? Was everybody rolling deep with apostles and disciples and curing diseases and walking on water? Oh, they didn't say that. But they said he performed magic feats like walking on water. So that's Jesus. Fourthly, the quote is not even found in the Old Slavonic text of Josephus. The real reference to Jesus in the Old Slavonic version is as follows. Pause. Heath reads the entry. I don't need to read that. So I'll keep going after his summary at the end. Oh yeah, back teeth. This is back teeth. I have not yet discovered what fake quote of Jesus is actually from, but it's definitely not the Slavonic Jesus. Obviously, this casts great doubt on the integrity of the black Jesus historians, since they cannot even provide valid sources and need to insert the name Jesus in brackets of a phony quote. Pause. If the person giving you the source said it was an undoctored original title and the title is in Greek, why are you wasting time reading the alleged doctored Slavonic version? Let me be clear to clear up confusion. To understand why Heath is lost and why I said the source of Beetlejuice hunchbacked Jesus is not that simple, I need to introduce you to Robert Eisler. And I'm going to read some of his Wikipedia entry because they have had this up for a while. So he was an Austrian Jewish polymath who wrote about the topics of mythology, comparative religion, the Gospels, monetary policy, art history, history of science, psychoanalysis, politics, astrology, history of currency, and value theory. He is best remembered today for advancing a new picture of the historical Jesus based on his interpretation of the Slavonic Josephus manuscript tradition. Now I'm going to stop my reading, and I got to say this. I'm going to skip forward through his Wikipedia to something that's a little more relevant to the topic. So here we go. When in Paris, Eisler gave lectures on the Slavonic Josephus manuscript, a version of Josephus's Jewish writing that Eisler argued was translated by a Judaizing heretic from a lost Greek version of an unattested Aramaic original, and was therefore free from the Christian censorship coloring every other version of the text. In a letter to the Times, this is April 17th, 1926, Eisler laid out the new narrative of Jesus' ministry and death that the reconstructed manuscripts described. There is no doubt now that the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and the cleansing of the temple were considered by Jews as well as Romans as a revolutionary rising against the Roman government. Yet it is very important to see that even this hostile and prejudiced statement does not imply an accusation that Jesus started this rising against the Roman army of occupation, but admits that he was urged by his zealotic followers upon the path which led to the conscious self-sacrifice on the cross. I'll leave a link to the source, and you can get it. You can get it from Wikipedia. This isn't coming from black people. This is coming from a white European Jew. In Eisler's book, The Messiah Jesus and John the Baptist, I was able to find two sources. I was able to find two of these PDFs online. Well, one I think you can read on a website, so I don't know if you can download it. And the one that I'm putting in that I got from Wikipedia, the PDF, if you go to a page on the PDF, not, in the book, not the PDF, 425, it cites Halosis, page 174. That's the source. So basically, Eisler got a hold of an old Greek text that would later become a younger, Old Slavonic, censored version of Josephus. I know that's confusing, but if you don't at least get to that point when people are giving you the title, that's poor research. Because I was able to find the source. Eisler had peer reviews, he had critics, but they didn't call him a fraud. Solomon Zeitlin was a contemporary critic that he kind of clapped back on in his book, Messiah Jesus and John the Baptist. But this was like a little conscious community beef. He wasn't calling him a fraud. Louis H. Feldman, a more modern critic, wrote, and I'm going to quote Feldman. So let me scroll down to this. I'm going to quote Feldman. Robert Eisler's theory about the Slavonic Old Russian version of Josephus is that it was translated from manuscripts of the first Greek edition of the Jewish War, which was called the Halosis, or the capture of Jerusalem, and was published in AD 72. However, it could have been as early as AD 71 because Josephus strove to have it ready for the triumph of Vespasian, or if I'm pronouncing that right, and Titus in Rome. The Halosis was a Greek rewriting of Josephus's original Aramaic rough draft that was made almost entirely by assistants hired for the purpose, since Josephus did not have adequate knowledge of the language. Pause that reading. I'm done with that reading. So even a modern critic did not regard Halosis as being a fake or Eisler as being a fraud, because that would be the logical criticism behind the source. I can't find any actual copies of Halosis online. It's not heavily reprinted, if at all digitalized. And that kind of reminds me in a way of Joseph Smith's golden plates. If you're a skeptic and you're wondering where is Halosis, where are any of Josephus's primary source Greek writings? I don't think I've found any like this is a primary Josephus. Maybe a picture of some old book, and even then, were they really putting books? Were these scrolls? But the other option is too conspiratorial, and there's no basis for it because even Eisler's critics were acknowledging and regarding Halosis as a real thing. And really, how much media shine would you expect a hunchback, midget, unibrowed black Jesus to get? Because Christianity isn't just a religion, it's also a business. Halosis described white Jesus, you would see Halosis on the History Channel monthly. It would be all over the news, television, and everything. It wouldn't just be a handful of scholars here and there quoting it. We're going to have a little break here. Then we'll get to the rest of the article. We'll get to some pictures.
Peep the description of a story in Josephus. Short, dark, with an underdeveloped beard was Jesus.
Next, Heath quotes a correspondence, or calls someone a correspondence. And this is quite a bit to read, so I'll sum it up. Basically, he says that one of his correspondences told him that the entire ancient world was black and cited Cheddar Man along with Adam and Eve and Nephilim. And this is all in the time frame of the Great Flood. I have a major issue interweaving Nephilim, worldwide floods, and Cheddar Man, because Cheddar Man is outside of the biblical timeline. Now, that said, I think his correspondence was close to making a good point, and I'll explain why I think it's a good point, but I want to read some of Heath's reaction first, so back to Heath. So the belief in an evolutionary origin is presented to back up a black Adam and Eve. I have dealt with the racist implications behind evolution elsewhere. Pause. Heath then links to another blog entry, and it's the same type of nonsense I've heard from like Ali Muhammad. Because usually when people talk about racism and evolution, they make a simple mistake. They will say, if white people evolved from black people, then they are further along in the evolution timeline, or that's how they're going to present it to the world. The obvious flaw in that is that black people are still evolving from other black people. Everything is constantly evolving because all evolution is change, and living things are constantly mutating. Mutations are change. The fact that humans in a certain part of the world would change to have lighter skin, it doesn't mean that humans in another part of the world would stop behaving like organic life all over the world. Heath also argues that Darwin was racist. Darwin had some things to say that were racist, and he had things to say that were humanizing. As Darwin was besides the point. The correspondence was making a point about genetics and pigment genes and how Africans have older, more diverse lineages, and how that renders Africa the human family tree, minus a few recent branches. This is also very condescending to exploit the victims of racism by telling them they should disregard schools of science because a person said some things that could be construed as racist. Who hasn't? We'd have to throw out America, religion, Egyptology. All of that stuff would be gone. It would have made more sense for Heath to cite James Watson, who was part of the team that discovered DNA. Because Watson, even in his old age today, he's still a racist. You can't disregard anything because of racism. If you live in America, that means you'd be disregarding everything. This is especially true today. With evolution, we're in the age of the COVID mutation. Like Brother Ankh always says, if we don't deal with evolution, evolution will deal with us, and it's dealing with us right now. Because where the correspondence had a point was in the context of pigment genes during the time of Abraham. By the time of Jesus, white skin was cracking. According to Eisler, this is Josephus. Josephus probably would have been white with that nose, even with, Polizzi's complexion. He'd probably been dark white. But during the biblically estimated timeline of Abraham, around 2000 BC, is a different story. And I'll again reference this. I'll probably include a link, because these are Greeks from 1800 to 2500 BC in the village of Shurapigado. They had the pigment genes of dark-skinned people. So as recently as 1800, you have black Greeks north of Crete, where early Greeks depicted themselves as having dark skin. And I've seen how these pigment genes predictors predict skin color. They have a bias that favors light skin as we typically define it, because Lewis Gage Jr. was predicted to have light skin. I'll provide the source. It's Hella's News Radio. It's page 6. And that's what I mean. This is a hard source to find because they used to have it translated for a while, and I don't speak Greek, so someone else had translated it. So if I were you, I think it would be good to save. Because think about it, if Greeks were black as recently as 1850 BC, then you can't just say Abraham came from Macedonia, natives in that region are white. Today, thus, Abraham was white. Back to Heath. I was also given a quote from Henry Field, curator of the Field Museum of Natural History from 1926 to 1934, allegedly proving the Mesopotamians were originating from Africans. But the entire mentality of the culture in that time of Henry Field, as well as the educational profession, was a racist expression against black Africans as the closest related to apes, and the anti-Semitic ideology was presented by claims that Jews were closely related to the black Africans. This concept was behind the propaganda campaign of Nazi Germany, causing the slaughter of millions of Jews who were considered predominantly ape. Pause. There were other reasons. Unpause. Back to Heath. It is peculiar that black people arguing for a black Jesus are using evolutionary ideologies that forged a pseudo-historical opinion to justify their view that blacks and Jews are inferior to whites. Pause. First, let's remember that the source for this dark-skinned, long-nosed, hunchbacked Jesus with prognathism was a white Jew, quoting another white Jew. And it's true, there is racial pseudoscience, and it's not just in the 20s and 30s. They related Jews to black people. You know, another reason you can't disregard everything because of aspects of racism within, or any other bias that might be within, is nobody besides the diaspora, you know, besides like African Americans, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Mexicans, Afro-Arabians. Nobody is genetically more related to Africans than West Asians, including the Levant and the Sephardic Jew. Even Ashkenazi Jews were more related to Southern Europeans than the people of the Levant, Italians. They're among the first out of Africa branch of Europeans at the root of the European family tree. By proxy, like Italians and Spanish, they are more related to Africans than other Europeans are. Also, listen to his words. Listen to his words carefully. He said, and I'm quoting directly, anti-Semitic ideology presented the claim that Jews were closely related to black Africans. Anti-Semitic ideology that Jews are closely related to black Africans. People, Semitics are black Africans. Semitic is a language family that is heavily spoken by black Africans. I mean, let me repeat that again. It's a language family that is spoken by black Africans. More than 1/3 of the historical Semitic languages are spoken by native Africans who would be classified as black in all the major linguistic theorists who classify African languages. Greenberg, who is a Jew, Obinga, Mboli, Imhotep, Eret, they cluster Semitic with African languages. According to this map, most of the living Semitic languages are spoken in Africa, because this map X's out the dead languages. And I know Arabic is a big dog. It probably came out of Arabia, but it's one dog in the pack. Most of the living dogs are Ethiopia by this map. Among people like Elias, 98% African. Or I think it was 97, 98, something like that. With quote unquote, he had Arabian haplogroups. This is a huge consensus, even if they don't agree like me, that the Afro-Asiatic model is, you know, I don't agree with it. I think we should build something new. It still clusters Semitic with African languages. Semitic is in Afro-Asiatic. Afro-Asiatic is with Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Congo in African languages. These are African Semitics. These are some Asian Semitics from Oman and Yemen. The bulk of the modern racism is in Heath's camp, and they're trying to separate Africa from the Homo sapien family tree, and Greater Africa from North Africa. It was about 4 years ago, there was a study that was published that Neanderthals produced pygmies and Khoisan. I think another study said that E and L3 developed outside Africa. It was garbage. It was propaganda, and that's one of the reasons I have issues with peer reviews, because they let stuff like that go. I'll provide a link to it. Or you can just look up Professor Ofer Arneson, the Out of Asia theory. The way he words it, it sounds like he bases his study on Grecko, which was a media fabrication. And for people who aren't familiar with population genetics, I'll put it real simple. L3 and E chromosomes on the human family tree. They are almost exclusive to Africa, Europe, and West Asia. Hitler was E. Ramses III was E. Most African Americans are E. So racists have an interest in claiming a European E for at least some kind of non-African origin. You can put it in Asia, just get it out of Africa. And likewise, the same is true with L3. It's all over Africa, on up through Europe, and its progeny, the recent alphabet haplogroups, which are tiny compared to one L branch, but they're more common outside of Africa. So the problem with that is almost all of the alphabet mtDNA haplogroups are branched in Africa in a way that would suggest that they diversified within Africa. So Ofer removed the mother of the alphabets when the actual evidence screams that the daughters were born there. Again, like Elias, as an example, he had an RO haplogroup. The earliest branch of R descends from N, which is relatively rare everywhere, but you still see it here and there in Africa. You'll still see it with like Maasai. And that's in spite of all the competition that it has with the beast that is L. You know, and N descends from L3. So that's the game that's played. It's in reverse of what Heath is talking about. Because you had media outlets saying that Europe was the birthplace of mankind because of Graciopithecus, and Graciopithecus wasn't human. It wasn't the oldest hominid. So it's one hominid amongst many. So Ofer was like, hey, in light of new evidence, and I think he was alluding to Graciopithecus, it is indubitably possible that L3 and E, etc., etc. And that's my issue with it. That's my issue with peer reviews, because if they'll let something like that that's blatant go by, think about all the subtle, slick bias. And you don't have to go back to Darwin for racism. Look up A Troublesome Inheritance by Nicholas Wade. His premise was that there were three major races: Africans, Caucasians, and East Asians. And he was basing this on genetics. And they inherited genes, and, you know, what you see is what you get, because it's all, you know, he was like pushing his way towards eugenics. But I can't say for certain because I didn't read it. But the thing is, like, other population genetics people were correcting them. They're like, if you're going to objectify race based on genetics, there's more than three races, and Caucasian ain't one of them. Diversity would dictate that there'd be a whole lot more, and most of them would be African. You can't just have one African race if you're going to objectify races. And if you're going to have Caucasians, then you got to have like 50 races, because Caucasian isn't even an ethnic hub. The Caucasus Mountains isn't even an ethnic hub for the European. So back to Heath. The other point from the email above worth mentioning is in reference to the Book of Enoch alleging that white people are either albinos or Nephilim. Pause. I'm not going to get into what Enoch or Nephilim, but objectively, white people, regardless of race, are either albinos or non-syndromic albino. And I sourced this a while ago in the video Black Neanderthals and Eurocentrum, down to how we share pigment genes with animals. And when those genes mutate, it reduces melanin in people and animals. People classed as white have pigment genes that produce less melanin, and it will be the same genes that produce the white stripes in zebrafish, the variations in albino tigers. But I'm supposed to put my head in the sand and be ignorant to evolution because person A was racist. Okay, I'm going to go back to Heath. Most websites avoid direct historical sources but argue mainly indirectly with the line of reasoning that Egypt was in Africa and being descended from Ham must have been black. Arguing for the Egyptians to have been black is suggesting the Jews are black because they are able to mix into Egyptian culture when seeking refuge, or were frequently mistaken for Egyptians. But Egypt has been a sort of melting pot from its earliest days. Pause. Notice Egypt is always supposed to be the melting pot, but not the places right next to Africa, like Italy with Rome or Greece, the Levant. Aren't they melting pots too? How are you going to have, because when you have a melting pot, it means there's black people. When have you ever heard of a melting pot that didn't have black people? Israel is right next to Egypt. So if Egypt is a melting pot, Israel is too. At least the portion of it. It's not like we don't see black Greeks, Romans. And how does he know Egypt was a melting pot in its earliest times? What are his sources for that? That's why I wanted to explore the rest of this article. Let's go deeper. Those black Greeks from Shurapigado were as old as 2500 BC. Egypt's earliest times are 1,000 years before black Greeks. Back to Heath. The Suppilumius Annals record a record from the widow queen of Egypt who requested a son from the Hittite king to be her husband, since she had no son for her deceased husband, and she was ashamed to take one of her servants to make him king. Pause. This is his example of Egypt being a melting pot. The widowed queen of King Tut, who had 2 stillborn children and a dead husband in a family that was proven to be incestuous, with the same data that produced their censored ancestry test because it was too African for media consumption. One queen, one diversity from an incestuous family does not make a nation a melting pot. And this was 1500 BC-ish. I don't remember offhand. Kind of close to the theoretic time of Moses. This is after Tut, so it's after the Hyksos invasions. This is not the early times. The Sinai Peninsula may have been a melting pot at that time. I don't know. Now, around that time, though, and later, this is how Egypt depicted themselves in West Asia, and this is how they depicted West Asians. You see people who, by my definition, would be classified as black, white, neither, blackish, whitish. You see that suspected Nazaraean part in East Africans and West Asians. Back to Heath. Herodotus relates how Psammethicus established 2 camps for Ionians and Carians to teach Egyptian children the Greek language so they can become translators, and King Amasis settled Greeks in the city of Memphis. Pause. This is a second example of Egypt being a melting pot in, quote, its earliest times. This is 4,000 years after the earliest time. Back to Heath. In an email, I heard the argument. In 70 AD, the Romans invaded Israel, causing millions of Israelites to escape to Africa. In his book, The Great Roman Jewish War, the Roman historian Flavius Josephus started over 1,000 years ago that the Israelites migrated into Asia. He writes, General Vespasian and his son Caesar Titus fought against the Jews. Millions of Jews fled into Africa, among other places, fleeing from Roman persecution and starvation during the siege. Statement shows a general ignorance of the source discussed. Josephus was not a Roman historian, but a Jewish historian. His book is not entitled The Great Roman Jewish War, but simply The Jewish War, which consists of 7 books. Pause, bruh. Full title in the Greek version, is Flavius Josephus's book of the history of the Jewish war against the Romans. So his source was just abbreviating it to Roman and Jewish war. And Heath was like, oh, he didn't even know what the name is. He's ignorant. No, Heath, you're ignorant. And I say that with love. In the name of Jesus, by the blood of Christ. So I'm going to skip forward. Because he's going back and forth with what sounds like Hebrew Israelites. And they're saying that the Jews went back and forth in and out of Egypt because they wanted to cloak themselves among other black Africans. I don't know about the Israelites as well as the Israelites. So I'm going to skip forward and go back to Heath. Moses is said to have an Ethiopian wife, which is literally a Cushite, not to be understood as a modern Ethiopian. Notes Cush is the son of Ham, whose descendants located in Africa, but also Dedan, modern day Saudi Arabia, as well as Nimrod, whose kingdom was in Mesopotamia. And he's sourcing this too. We know Moses's wife was from modern Saudi Arabia because she was a Midianite. And Habakkuk parallels Cushan with the land of Midian. The book of Jubilee locates Cush's descendants east of Egypt, Mizraim, placing it as modern day Saudi Arabia. One cannot simply assume descendants of Ham were all located in Africa, making them black. Pause. Descendants of Ham were not all located in Africa, and I don't see this story as real because there was no great flood, there was no Noah, there was no Ham. He seems to believe the story. So he's saying that the children of Noah fathered the world's population, and even the ones who went to Africa, not all of them were black. That's the Hamitic theory. Like, if you don't know the Hamitic theory, basically says, we know the Bible says Noah had 3 sons who populated the world. And we know Ham fathered the people of Egypt, the Sudan, North Africa, and the Levant. But these weren't black people. These were Hamites. The black people, those are just random jigaboos of the forest who evolved from animals. So indirectly, Heath is kind of going back to real pseudo-evolution stuff. And he goes on to quote Dante Fortson, who I guess is a person he's going back and forth with. And I don't know who that is. So this is Heath quoting Dante. Dante Fortson writes, Egyptians depicted themselves as black people. There's no evidence of white Egyptians ever existing. Egypt was always recognized as a black nation until white people realized that Hebrews were described as looking like Egyptians. White teachers that deny the factual history of black Egypt do so to avoid admitting that Hebrews lived in Africa, married African people, and therefore looked like African people with black skin. Practically every point by this author's quotation above is historically wrong. Egypt did not depict themselves as black. There is evidence of white Egyptians, and it is not white people who is revising the history of Egypt's skin color. Pause. That was Heath responding at the end. And that's why I had to define black. I took that time to do that. My favorite quote from Jesus, and I think it works here. Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. And I'm saying this with love. Under the anointing spirit of the Holy Ghost, you are a white man revising Jesus' skin color and Egypt's. Dante provided pictures of black Egyptians, and Heath responds, back to Heath, the darker color may seem to depict black skin until one can view Egyptian art that reveals the contrast between themselves, being painted reddish brown, and the Nubians, which would be directly south of Egypt and consistently displayed with black skin. The white people with beards in the images below are Semitic people of Israel or Syria. Pause. This is why you have to define black. Dante gave Heath images of people who would be classified as black or mistaken for people who are classified as black. And Heath responds with true Negro. He goes from Hamitic theory to true Negro to the Nubian fallacy. That's the script. For those of y'all that don't understand, there are no Nubians in ancient Egypt. This was a Roman era catch-all for people in Upper Egypt and Kush, among the locations that had the Egyptian word nupt for gold in their name. Kush is what people usually refer to, but Egyptology tends to throw any random dark-skinned person operating in the Nile Valley into the Nubian convention. The people who are typically referred to as Nubians, those are Kushites, as in Kush, one of the sons of Noah, brother to Mizraim, which in the Aramaic Bible language, that's Egypt. That's Mizraim. By the Bible, the true Negro Africans are brothers to the Africans he acknowledged are dark skin. Because he said the Egyptians have dark skin. You know, these pictures might seem like people with dark skin until you compare them to their biblical brothers who are darker than them. That's a true Negro game. He proved Dante's point. And he further contradicts himself by providing pictures of black and red Africans among the same nation and tribe. He uses an image that is restored with bias because when you compare this image to the primary or other instances, when Kushites, Asians, and Libyans were side by side, you can see the contrast isn't as always as stark as this. And then he continues to show these images, these three images, and he says it reveals that white Egyptians clearly exist. You see how racism is taught? He picked up the white Egypt script and got on code. Didn't care if the site is called Truthwatch. He's still spitting lies. He's on code. This is beyond cognitive dissonance. His source said dark skin provides a picture of someone with dark skin. He acknowledged it was dark skin. He used restored images without fact-checking their authenticity or context. And Heath is an American. He knows what black people are. He's not stupid. He has an article where he talks about how Louis Farrakhan did not want the Nation of Islam to be racially inclusive. Let me repeat that. He has an article where he talks about how Louis Farrakhan did not want the Nation of Islam to be racially inclusive. In that context, Farrakhan is black. Yet Farrakhan is lighter than the Egyptians that he says aren't black. Heath is lying, and again, I say that with love. Under the bounding spirit of noon, by the blessed light of Rhea, and the loving, fragrant embrace of Isis's bosom. Truthwatchers needs to watch Truthwatchers. This lies on this website. He knows what black people are. You know, if we're going to go to Egypt, let's go to the Nile. I started studying ancient Egypt in 2013, and I saw more signature African features than I expected. I'm seeing some big bubblicious lips, some fat noses, but they don't get invited on the Today Show. The Nefertiti bus, it's a possible fraud. That's a different discussion. Based on the younger lady mummy, KV35YL had an ancestry test that clustered her with Africans. Even though Egyptians depict themselves with dark skin, by Heath's admission, the Today Show invites white Nefertiti, and that's how the game is played. You observe the game. You got the hive-minded, alt-rightish KKK bigots. They take about 10 pictures of ancient Egyptians, 10 fake pictures of ancient Egyptians, 10 biased reconstructions of ancient Egyptians. They put them together in a video montage and they say, look, Egyptians were white. Egyptians were Caucasian. I'm like, do you not have a map? Do you not know where the Caucasus Mountains is, fool? But that's what they do. And I said in a recent video, I would take the pictures of Romans and Greeks and argue that they're black. I could if I'm going to buy that standard, but I'm not going by the bulk. Because if you go by the bulk of images of Egyptians, they're within that range of African features. From the signature bubblicious lips to some atypical African features to a sort of homogenized signature Egypt. Lots of diversity. The first video on my channel, I shared my notes and how there were so many fake statues and biased restorations that ancient Egyptians are basically in two-face. But only one face gets invited to the Today Show. John O. Woodley and Sarah Bond, they've written about this. I'm going to leave these images up so you can read them and see some examples of what I'm talking about. I'm going to show a few examples. Because the bulk of these biased restorations, unverified attestations, and the frauds, they're in the pyramid era. And the focus is on the dynasty that produced the Great Pyramid. And I think we all know why racists would target the pyramid era. Like, that's obvious. Now, I'll give an example. Take a look at this dynasty. Take a look. This is grandpa, father, siblings. On the right, you have a sign of head replacement. Look at that. You see this with Hemiunu, the head is gone. They replaced it with a head. It looks like no other ancient Egyptian head you ever see, especially in this family. And it looks like it was put on a woman's body. Then the head looks like it came from a mannequin at Macy's. So they take this contraption that they built, this ridiculous restoration, and they tell you this is the architect of the Great Pyramid. This is Khufu. He was the king at the time. I believe he's Hemiunu's uncle. I forget how they're related. Now, if you look at Khufu, he was the king at the time. They call him Pharaoh, but the etymology is closer to king than Pharaoh. Now, he's the one on the bottom left. I don't think the one on the bottom left is him. The other two are, I guess, better attested to be him. I think the one on the bottom left might be the real head of Hemiunu, low-key. Top row is all Menkaure. This is how crazy the two faces of ancient Egypt is. Middle row is Khafre, bottom is Jeffrey. Now with Menkaure, it's like 5 faces. And I see this, I've seen all the available art damn near. I'm surprised when I see something new. And this one right here in the middle, and I put it on the side, is Tut or Jehunimus. I don't know which one. But this one, I could tell was fake. And this is like the only one that fakes up some African features. All the other fakes and the edits, they trying to take Egyptians and make them look like Benedict Cumberbatch. That's the game. But the one fly in that cake soap is that you still have a bunch of unedited work. And when you compare the unedited ones, you can kind of see what's real and what isn't most of the time. Sometimes I don't know. The other fly in the cake soap is Egyptians colored themselves. So you can't say they're white. Red was a typical color, and black Africans like Julius Malema are that exact same color. So are the majority of the Kushites, or about half the Kushites that Ramses II fought. Then there are times when the ancient Egyptians draw themselves up brown or dark brown to black, like in the tomb of Ramses II. You see that right there above the Julius Malema image. And this use of black in deep red, like red, this is deep in Africa. The Essen people, they'd probably be considered red. I'm still studying the Essen people. It's interesting, he wearing a Khufu and holding a fly with. Kufi, I mean. He's wearing a Kufi and he's holding a fly with, like Khufu. The only Egyptian prosthetic ever found is painted dark to mimic dark skin. That's paint. As somebody say, the wood got darker with age, and I had to show them the source that said that that's paint. Zoom in on it, you can see the paint strokes. When Egyptians draw up themselves in a variety to symbolize a multitude of people and more people than they can depict in their 2D artwork, mostly 2D, you see a greater range in skin complexions. So when he shows an image of quote-unquote white Egyptians, my reaction is this is probably fake, but I gotta fact check them. One of these pictures is Nofret and Rahotep, and that screams fake. The other picture I had never seen, it's a red flag, but I still looked into it. And there's no way to really verify this image right here, because it's in a gallery with a bunch of real, bunch of fake images. I might be able to draw more from it if I read the writing, but that'll take some time. The problem, though, is there's no date for it. It's not in the museum. It could have been created in the 21st century. Some tourists could have drew it up, took like an offering formula or whatever, or greetings, and put that on there, and even it might even read right. So I suspect it's fake, but there's no real way to know. And it's not a good example because he's arguing based on a time period in a neighborhood that's large enough for people to blend into. And that's, 3 images. That's not it. Even if they are real. Like that one I would suspect isn't. There's no way to know. The second image, I didn't know at first, but I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. I mean, this is merit. It traces okay. It looks like a real person in a museum. So I think he has an authentic white person. Point for Heath. It's not good enough. Like, you got to have more than one if you want to make the argument that a person won't stick out. And I'm not 100% sure about merit because she looks kind of yellow in one picture. She has a Kass statue, and usually those are like black. But this one is more like Egyptian dark red. Her dress is kind of odd. Like, it could be a big fake for all I know. Like that, the whole thing would be, like, Egyptologists did some weird stuff, but it would be extra. I think it's a little bit easier for me to believe that this is a authentic image of a white woman, but it wouldn't surprise me if this is fake. So I'll give this one the benefit of the doubt. Now, when we get to Nofret and Rahotep, they're both fake. And I was going to do a video on this before I ran into this, and this is just coincidence or the law of attraction. Because I had my reasons. I've researched Gale Lalande, Professor Manu Ampim, and in total, this is why Rahotep and Nofret are fake. And I don't know Gale Lalande, but a lot of this is from him. So I'm mostly going off his work, and I'll include some of my commentary. Uncharacteristic, shoddy workmanship. We got sloppy paint all over the place. Rahotep's chair is slightly wider than Nofret's, uncharacteristic for the symmetry and dimension-conscious ancient Egyptians. The limestone seating is painted. That's unconventional. Might have seen it once or whatever. Don't see that too often. Rahotep is represented with his right arm folded across his chest and his left resting on the left side, on his left leg. That's unusual. I can't speak to that. The male's hands are typically on the knees, to the side, or one arm behind his companion, and one hand on a knee or on the side. That's unconventional. Rahotep's hand is raised across his chest. His fists appear to be clenched but empty. Unconventional. He's missing the fly whisk or the flail. Nofret's arm extends into her tight and revealing gown. I don't know what that's supposed to signify. Is she cold on a separate slab? And this is unconventional. I've never seen, I've seen the nipples maybe in a couple statues, but I've never seen someone with their hand in their clothes like that. The hieroglyphs behind the seat of Rahotep is said to read the titles: Unique Chief, Seer of Halosis. Okay, I'll skip that. That seems accurate. Nofret's title in the hieroglyphs, it just reads King's Acquaintance. That's like the modern equivalent of King's Thought. And why does it say king when this is supposed to be the king's brother? The Rahotep was not a king. Gale Lalande says he mentions the nipples piercing through. That is unusual, but I have seen that, like I said, in at least one piece of work. White paint on Nofret's hand. Yeah, there's a lot of paint, sloppy. The hieroglyphs are painted on the backrest behind the head of both Rahotep and Nofret. In any other instance, writing is engraved into the slab below or on the side. This is unconventional. Now, really, this is unique. Not only is this unique, if you look close, there is a square outline around these hieroglyphs like they were decaled on. This is bad. Like, no, this is the one that gives it away to me. Nothing else is like this. You can find decaled hieroglyphs in sloppy paint and it ain't saying stuff or a king's acquaintance. I mean, they might as well have put thought just to be funny. Rahotep and his consort Nofret are not seated as companions together on one but two separate slabs. This is unlikely, this is unlike any other example in the long history of ancient Egypt art. It's one of a kind, it's unconventional. I presume so. I mean, like, if you compare this, there's a few that have similar color patterns where it's red and yellow. Maybe one that's red and white. But top to bottom, feature-wise, color, the quality being that this is supposed to be the 4th dynasty, it's way out of the box. That's why when you compare Rahotep to his brother, Khufu, so I would say both of these are fake. I'll give him 1.5, clear fake, a possible fake, and one I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. You know, another thing with Rahotep, he doesn't look like his 2D depiction. Like then you have the rarity of mustaches. Like, these are the only mustaches I could find. Maybe one other statue of Khafre. And, you know, like, this being his brother, I'm a liberal thinking man. I'm liberal thinking. I'm sure there was a range of phenotype in ancient Egypt. You had people that look like Rahotep. You know, that's okay. You got people in the Sudan who look like Rahotep. But brothers, nah, this is, if you're familiar with some of the other ways that statues were faked, this is obvious. Because you got a lot of stuff that's real and it pushes us out. Because even, look, this is the 4th dynasty. Let's say Nofret was an albino. Remember, this is older than Black Greeks of Shirapigado. Nofret and white Jesus, they couldn't blend in. If Nofret was an albino and she stole an amulet from Rahotep and he sent men, you know, throughout the land to get his amulet back, I don't want to cuss, but she'd be screwed. She'd be effed. You know, they'd be looking around, hey, where that big booty white girl thought, skin tight dress, got paint all over her. She's always cold. She got her hand in her dress. Yeah, that wouldn't work for her, and it wouldn't work for white Jesus. They'd both be screwed. So I had to say that. I had to go on a little long, but back teeth. When referencing the ancient literature, people need to understand the looseness of the word language used by ancient authors. For example, black and white in the ancient world were used as relative terms, according to Philo, who said in point the fact everything which is not white is black. Pause. What Philo says is irrelevant because there's no such thing as black and white races during the time of ancient Egypt and Philo. We're obviously using modern terms. There was no Negro, colored, mulatto, octoroon. We're referring to what they would be called today, like on a TV show or something like that. In the source that he later cites, Philo says that black, however, was a relative term sometimes applied to whatever was not white, not everything that wasn't white. And the source goes on to say that people from the north sometimes call darker people in their south black, whether in Gaza or Egypt, or among African people like Libyans and Mauritanians. If people in Gaza are calling people south of them black, where is Gaza? Where is Bethlehem? Bethlehem is south of Gaza. That means even his source, by his standard, Jesus was born in a location that had black people, according to Heath. So back to Heath. Craig Keener, who writes with an encyclopedia knowledge of the ancient world revolving around the New Testament times, as said ancient Mediterranean literature used Africa south of Egypt as a standard of blackness. Pause. I had to look up Keener. I looked up that source, his book, Acts and Exegetial Commentary. The ancient Mediterranean definition of black has nothing to do with this conversation. We're talking about, and his source, the person who provided the picture of the Egyptians, we're talking about black like Farrakhan, or in this case, blacker than Farrakhan, not black like what Philo might have pictured. So the source is irrelevant, yet Heath misquotes the source anyway. His source says that it's sometimes relative, which means that a people, they don't have to be the standard of blackness to be black, or the standard of whiteness to be white. Again, we're dealing with Cushites who are south of Egypt, their biblical brother. And by the true Negro standard, Greeks are not white because they're not true albinos. When Asarmotep interviewed Rebecca Kennedy, she quoted the way Greeks referred to lighter-skinned Europeans. They were the standard of white from their point of view. If we're going to play true Negro, we need to keep it 100 and play true albino. By that standard, Greeks are not white. And the people of Levant, they're not white. The ancient definition might be relevant if Heath says, you know what? This source from Josephus could be authentic. So from their point of view, what did they view as dark skin? Well, it's a little bit different if you're talking about a Roman historian, because Romans knew what dark-skinned people were. They were around dark-skinned people. So back to Heath. Egypt as a melting pot of skin colors offers no sound argument for those reasonings that Jews hid in Egypt to blend among the black population. The Jews originated from Mesopotamia, which would provide a closer connection with the Persians' preference of lighter skin in the quote above. The Jews were held as slaves in Egypt for some centuries before God called them. Pause. If Persians, and you do see pictures of black Persians, and you do have Herodotus saying that there were Ethiopians among Persians. So if Persians had a preference, based on one quote, for light skin, then isn't Persia a melting pot? Because you already have pictures of black Persians, and if they have a preference for light skin, that has to be in relation to other complexions. And by this standard, isn't Yorubaland a melting pot, since you have people who are light-skinned like Mama D? Bottom left. Isn't pre-gentrified Harlem a melting pot? I mean, because think about it. If blacker than the pictures that were provided of Egyptians is true Negro, and most African Americans don't, by that standard, are not true Negro, then that means you would have a combination of true blacks and, I guess, I don't know what he would call someone who's as dark as the Egyptians provided. So that would be a melting pot in Harlem. So back to Heath. In my former posts, I traced the Jewish complexion through ancient Mesopotamian literature as the obvious historical antecedent for the Jews, even quoting the Dead Sea Scrolls, which indicated the Egyptians saw Abraham's wife Sarah as beautiful because she was white, demonstrating the Egyptians liked the lighter skin for women, as did the Persians. Pause. The Dead Sea Scrolls are close to the time of Persia, but Abraham was more than 1,000 years before the Dead Sea Scrolls in Persia. The consensus of the Dead Sea Scrolls was 150 BC at the latest. Abraham is 2000 BC. This would have to be like divinely inspired to even know. But why does it sound so worldly if it's divinely inspired? The Egyptians like white women. I mean, if that is your divinely inspired message, you need to recast your commune with God ritual or spells or whatever, if that's the best you can do. Because there's some real moral gems in the Bible. That they liked white women has no value today, because this was a world from their time and perspective. This is not 2000 BC. Because 2000 BC, you really think, oh, well, there's some white women. Like I said a bunch of times, the Greeks tested so far were black. Blacker than Skip Gates. And Heath talks about how anti-Semitic Romans argued that Jews came out of Egypt, Ethiopia, or Syria. Then he goes on to say that Manetho said the Jews were not from Egypt and didn't get along with them. I'll quote him directly. So back to Heath. For the black Jesus historians to claim the Jews had originated from Egypt reveals the counterintuitive argument on their behalf as they adopt the anti-Semitic historical revisionist position to provoke their view. Pause. This again. Black Jesus historians, why can't they just be historians who have a take? This discussion becomes convoluted. I don't know or how or why they even care where the Jews came from. So I'm not getting like exactly what the argument it is, why they're on this thing about where the Jews came from. By the Bible, everybody came from Turkey where Noah landed anyway. So I don't entertain this nonsense. It's reasonable to assume that the Levant people came from Egypt. There's nothing anti-Semitic or revisionist about this. This is basic out of Africa migrations. Genetically, it is what it is. West Asia is an extension of Africa. You also see this in linguistics. Hebrews cluster with African languages. Like Hebrew clusters with African languages. I won't say Hebrews, but the language. And even though I'm not a Greenberg person, I'm all in favor of rebuilding African languages. We got to remember that Greenberg was a Jew who put Hebrew in African language families. He didn't do it because he was a Jewish sellout. He didn't do it because he was anti-Semitic. It is what it is. The Hebrew language clusters with Africa, as does Sumerian, Basque, and Arabic. And the reason why is simple, because they're close to Africa geographically and genetically. They didn't leave Africa speaking caveman grunts. They spoke an African language when they left Africa. Even with all the invasions that Egypt has faced, you still see genetic decline out of Africa. You see it with haplogroups. You see it with K2 admixture. You can see the genetic decline when people model it. Maestro from EgyptSearch demonstrated that Bronze Age Israel as a population is an extension of a lower Egyptian group, which is probably an extension of a Neolithic group that left Africa fairly recently. Now again, this is just one population in Bronze Age Israel, regardless. They're also related to Natufians, who are known for having more African features anthropologically, genetically more related to people of the Levant. Back to Heath. Herodotus mentions the Dodonians, who called foreign women doves, and also black, which indicated that the woman was an Egyptian. The term black for Egypt is not due to their skin color, but Egypt was called Kimi, black, Kimi, from the color of the rich soil, not from the people. Pause. Kimi is the term for black. If they were calling them black, then that's the color black. The nation is Kemet, not Kimi. Kimi is black. If they were calling them Kimi, and this is how people typically talk about this story, I haven't read it, but they're saying they are using the word Kimi. They're using Kimi and doves together, like white and doves. It's like old world slang, like you'd use hoe, like pimp talk. Like that's my black hoes, my white hoes. Instead, they're my doves, That is how I've read the story. So I could be off. I haven't read it like deeply. I haven't read it in a while. But I also know Kimi is not the word for Egypt. So they're not talking about Egypt if they're saying Kimi. And also, Kimi or Kemet is not for the soil or the people. It just means Egypt. And there's an etymology to it that is more related to the land. If you want to see that, look up Asar Imhotep's debate with Nebuchadnezzar, and especially the part where he talks about Sumerian and Chaluba. There's a number of videos that go through how to perform an etymology on an Egyptian word. All right, back to Heath. He says Colchians are believed to have descended from Egyptians and describe the Colchians as black face and woolly hair, which certainly amounts to but little since several other nations are too. Had Herodotus wanted to claim the Jews were black, he could have in the very same paragraph as he mentions them only to connect them with the practice of circumcision. Pause. Herodotus also connects Ethiopians and Egyptians to circumcision. He connects Egyptians to Colchians because they had black skin and woolly hair. I read that correctly. I read what he said correctly. He basically tried to play a Jedi mind trick with the source. And I'm not some random stormtrooper. I read clearly. You can't just use Jedi mind tricks on me. Colchians are a colony of Egyptians because they have black skin and woolly hair. That is saying Egyptians have black skin and woolly hair, and your response is, quote, which certainly amounts to but little since several other nations do too. That don't make any sense. The argument is over appearance. If someone says you might be related to Tiger Woods because you look Cablinasian, that means Tiger Woods looks Cablinasian. Your response can't be, well, a whole bunch of other people do too. Look, it's more honorable to tap out than play games and mislead people. And again, I say this with love. By Nyame's mercy, by a thunderous clap from Shango, with love, with love. Man, like, you just tap out. You're going to throw a Jedi mind trick in his writing. That, to me, shows this is for like an echo chamber. Who is this for? I'm going to skip forward through most of his summary, because most of his summary is him complaining about the sources. And that's mostly on him, because they gave him Halosis. They gave him a primary description of black Egyptians. They even gave him Cheddar Man for context. Their sources were okay. But there are a few things, though, I want to respond to in the summary. So I'm going to go back to Heath. The primary evidence is structured around indirect arguments about Egypt being black. This is presented as proof by either revising history to assert the Jews were originated from Egyptians, or had to flee Egypt because they could flee into Egypt because they could mix in with the black population. Pause. The part about fleeing into Egypt, that's more of an Israelite argument. I can't really speak on it. But when it comes to the Levant descending from black Africans of Egypt, it's basic population genetics and pigment gene. This would have happened like back during the time of Cheddar Man. So that's an easy debate. Back to Heath. The first assertion of black Egyptians is debunked by the Bible itself, which recognizes the origin of the Hebrews from Mesopotamia. Pause. Now, the Bible also says that Egyptians were the brothers of the people you call the standard of blackness. Mesopotamia or northern Iraq. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not a biblical historian, but I thought he came from northern Iraq, but they're close anyway. So back to Heath. If biblical history is rejected, there is essentially no reason to claim Jesus was black, as his uniqueness is derived from the Bible. Pause. God, you know what I'm going to say. There's no place in the Bible that says Jesus is a tall white man, yet you can find images of Jesus everywhere as a tall white man. Giant statues in Brazil, Poland, Nigeria, Mexico. Much of his uniqueness, or I wouldn't say uniqueness, but much of Jesus's brand is tied to his appearance, or you wouldn't have taken the time to write this. I wouldn't have called Megyn Kelly a racist. I would not have fact-checked my claim. I would not have found this article. I would not have responded to it. So we got the oldest description of Jesus as a hunchback unibrow dwarf with a long nose, parted hair like the Nazaraean, and a scraggly beard. There's no documentaries about this description. There's no heavily printed books. There's no Shroud of Torrent treatment. And this is the oldest description, historical description of Jesus. As Mike Malloy said it right, we do have a Christian cult of fascists in this country, and they're trying to steer this country to an idiocracy if they haven't already. They're using white Jesus as a tool to do a lot of it. Tall, lily white, handsome Jesus. Now imagine if instead of white Jesus, they had Palestinian-born rabbi Jewish Jesus with a Semitic nose, dark skin, unibrowed, hunchback, and dreads, or braids like those parts from the Semitics in Africa and West Asia. And one more thing, because I said I was going to get into the earliest images. And before I get to that, I do want to also say this. A lot of things contradict the Bible, especially the Old Testament. We talk about the uniqueness from the Bible. What about the uniqueness from Egypt? The circumcised Ethiopians, don't they contradict the Bible? If I flash a little nudity, we're talking the same type of circumcision. And much of Egypt's history contradicts the Bible. Parting the Red Sea with magic before Moses, thousands of years before Moses was written about. And yeah, this is the nudity. Pre-dynastic circumcision in black Africans, down to the same type and the same customs in which they're performed. That contradicts the Bible. There's no record of a person named Moses in Egypt in their history. You do have Amos. The Moses story reads like an appropriation of Amos. Egypt hard contradicts the Old Testament. They were building pyramids during the time of the flood. Yet here we have Josephus describing Jesus within 70 years, yet the source is ignored and spends more time on Egypt. It seemed like, I'd say about half this article is on Egypt. Egypt draws its uniqueness from Egyptian history, not the Bible. Egypt draws its uniqueness from the artwork they created of people who would be classified as black today. One more thing, so I'll go back to Etho. The latter argument for black Egyptians shows an ignorance of the historical social setting of Egypt, which was a melting pot long before the 1st century, as my first post on the topic presented clear references to the skin complexion of Jews and their Mesopotamian ancestors. The evidence offered there remains definitive as the true historical answer of this question. Pause. You see, he wasn't just talking about 1st century, because then that would be different. We were talking about the Sinai Peninsula as a melting pot during the 1st century. This is after Rome, this is during the time when Rome was a province. After it was invaded by Greeks and Persians and Assyrians, Cushites, Hyksos. So Heath goes back, because we're talking about the origin of Abraham. 2000 BC, I think it is, right? I checked his source, and I could not find any passage from the Bible that mentions the color of the Hebrews. So in his source, which was himself, and I read through it, and there's one part, but it kind of reminds me of Jesus' wool hair and bronze feet, but even more so in the sense that it sounds more like Holy Ghost talk, because there's a passage that says, her Nazaraeans were pure as snow, they was whiter than milk, and they were ruddy in body as rubies. Their polishing was sapphire, their visage is blacker than coal. And I looked at the Aramaic version of that, and I saw how Hebrews read it, and they replaced ruddy with red, because in Aramaic that's supposed to be what the Bible was written in, ruddy with red. So you were white as snow, you were red as rubies, now you're blacker than coal. That is Holy Ghost talk. That doesn't really talk about what people look like in 2000 BC. Now you can look at how Egyptians depicted people coming from that region, and look at the primaries. Don't look at the recreations. And I would say, if you take this person and you put them amongst a bunch of white people, you could say that person is black or blackish. This is the Egyptians doing it. So let's look at some other pictures though, because we have some relatively early pictures of Jesus in Hebrews, and I want to fact check those. The first one I looked at was the Coptic Museum's Black Jesus, and this is interesting because this is taking you back to Egypt's Jesus. And I'm trying to find out where it came from, and it takes me to this site called Fake History Hunters. I've heard people say it's 3rd century, 4th century, 8th century. The website argues that the pic is from the 17th century with Russian influence, and it was done maybe by Arabians. And it does look like Russian influence. That's why I'm comparing it to like some other images where they have like Black Mary, Black Jesus. You can kind of see the similarity. And supposedly he contacted the museum. I didn't go that far. The website also argues that Popular Mechanics Jesus is probably more accurate. The author kept saying that the image is not behind tape, and if it's really this old, people would talk about it more. And to me, it shows he doesn't understand white supremacy or the brand that Jesus is. Even if it was 6th century or 4th century, it would not be like this world famous thing and be protected and all that. And I'll show you how I can tell. I'll show you how, because like I'm scrolling down, we do get to the oldest picture, but I notice that it looks different. And to the point where I'm surprised. I'm like, I remember how this looked. This is different compared to what I remember. It had been whitewashed, because this is what the image looked like, and this is what was on his site. And I had seen this years ago, so I did some reverse image searching because I want to know what happened. And what I found was that this Yale quote about the restored image. It comes from Lisa Brody, and this is Yale that did this. This is a university. In preparation for the installation in the art gallery's Dora Europos exhibit, the paintings were restored based on the photographs and drawings from the excavation. You hear that? Why do you need to take a painting and make it look like a photograph? Because I mean, when you see this image before this restoration, there's your short, dark Jesus like Josephus was talking about. So I'm going to continue with Lisa Brody. Normally, we would not perform such restoration of an ancient wall painting, but we decided it was necessary, Brody said. We didn't try to make them look like new, but using the photographic documentation of the excavation, we tried as much as possible to make them look as they appeared in 1932 when they were discovered. What? Why would you want something to look like the 30s? It's a black and white era. It's black and white photography. This isn't a restoration. This is a defacement. And it's already fooled one author on the fake history site. He might have had a different take if that was the picture he had. They used an image of Mary that they made black and white digitally as an example. But this doesn't hold up logically because both images were legible. And you can see it better with the other picture. This was done to the image of Jesus in Dora Europos Church. You have the healing of the paralytic. You have the Good Shepherd Jesus. You have Jesus walking on water, but that picture crops off his head. These are the 3rd century images. These are the oldest pictures of Jesus, and Yale restored them to make them look like a black and white photo. This, to the layman, like the fake history blog person, is a whitewash of the oldest image of Jesus. They could have done this digitally. And look, where else have you heard this? Subscribe 42 Tribes. You'll hear things that you'll never believe. I didn't believe it. I'm like, you wanted to make it look like the 30s? Why? I mean, Muslims, they don't even let you draw up Muhammad. They let this woman deface Jesus, the oldest picture of Jesus. And here's the thing. Dora Europos has images of people that they color in. Some are brown. Some would be defined as black, blackish, white, whitish, different facial features. And these are 2 examples of their Moses, the Red Sea. And you can see this is like the earliest filter because you have 2 and with different filters. And if I was going to be like Heath, I could say that obviously Moses is not white. Clearly, these are not white people. This is not a true albino. The standard of whiteness is achieved by Moses' robe, which is indubitably rendered as white
in comparison. So clearly these are definitely not white people.
People are gonna say the 42. You's paranoid.
Look. Let me tell you. To the layman, this is a whitewash. Because this goes from ambiguous, possibly blackish Jesus to ambiguous white Jesus. And I've already seen it so many times with Egypt receipts and all. But if you really think I'm paranoid, I want you to look at Philip Emeagwali.
Surely 42? There's no way anyone would whitewash this man. Clearly he's a black man.
Yeah. I know there are Dinkas in the Sudan that are blue blacker than him and all that. There are Asians that are blacker than him. The University of Michigan did this to Philip Emeagwali. See, he has 190 IQ, and he was involved in engineering cell processing, and he won a Gordon Bell Prize. So the University of Michigan, not like some backwoods hillbillies, said that he has like a one drop of Caucasian blood, and in their insecurities, they rendered him, in their mind, totally Caucasian. Some pseudo race that Blumenbach created. Philip Emeagwali, as you can see, does he look like a Caucasian? I know it's fictional, but does he look like the fictional image that Blumenbach created? So I'm not paranoid. I may be annoyed, but I'm not paranoid. And I'm not done with whitewashing Jesus. These are the oldest pictures, 3rd century, but we're going to look at the second oldest pictures. Let's go to Rome. We got the next oldest pictures of Jesus. And now I typically see Romans as white people, but I know there are examples of Roman paintings where they paint over Egyptian walls and they paint themselves as white. And I've seen images of black Romans. So this really shouldn't be that much of a surprise. These are images of early Christians. This is Good Shepherd Jesus, Last Supper, lots of Last Suppers. You can see even early bearded Jesus, black and white. Now see, this kind of looks like a melting pot to me. Like this looks like something a melting pot society would do. Now why would Rome be a melting pot? What is Rome next to? Africa maybe? Ding, ding, ding. Now we start to see, just like Egypt. Look at this. Look at this image right here. That's Negro Jesus. And this is two faces of ancient Jesus. Just like you had two faces of ancient Egypt, you got three faces. You got angry black rebel Jesus. Jesus, all of them got good hair. Like kind of regular blackish Meghan Markle's brother Jesus. Now, I can say angry black Jesus is the oldest in a reverse image search. I don't know if this is filters. I don't know what's going on here. I'm maybe paranoid. I looked this up trying to see what any patterns I can find with the oldest image. I don't know. You know, like I'm dumbfounded when I look at Philip Emeagwali in Egypt. So I'm forever going to be a skeptic. I'll be conscious and vigilant. I do want to say this since we're nearing the end. Take a look at some of these old pictures from Rome of Abraham and Isaac. I know people sent these pictures. If he was debating if Heath was debating with Israelites, I know they sent some pictures. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure if Jesus existed or someone who Jesus would be based on. I don't know. I'm mixed. I'm 50-50. Maybe before I would have been 20-80 or 60-40. And I've moved more to the middle because I could not debunk the source. I couldn't debunk Josephus's Jesus. I think the popular mechanics Jesus is arguably realistic. I haven't seen enough recreations or forensics work done on people in that region to compare it to. You never know. If you're basing it on one person, I would say this. I will say this in summary. I would like to see Josephus's Jesus expressed in modern media, film, or whatever, because it's such a symbol of oppression. A Palestinian rabbi, hunchbacked, unibrow midget, with a nose that's kind of West Asianish, and a complexion that's darker than the typical Palestinian. When I talk about Christian fascism, I'm talking about a type of Christian that would see this image of Jesus and say, that is not marketable, or that is woke, or blah, blah, blah. They have a problem with it. I'll leave it at that. The next video, I will talk about how my ancestry tests, when I compare them to people who are more African than me, because I'm like a third European, give or take, and people who are less. What I found, I'm comparing myself to other African Americans who are more African, and to European Americans who are like 1% African or less. What I found is that the African and African American clusters more with modern Egypt in comparison to the European and African Americans, or just the European American in general. Now, that probably doesn't come as any surprise to you. We're dealing with Africans compared to Europeans, and we're talking about Northwest Europeans who are much further away and would have mixed a lot less with Egypt than, say, like Sardinians or Sardinians in Spain or Italy, Sicilians or Greeks. So it shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but I do want to cover this because it reveals the flaw or the contradiction, and I would say it's both flaw and contradiction based on the way they're presented, in admixture graphs and PCAs that you commonly see on population genetics papers, because that contradicts ancestry tests. And when I say ancestry tests, I got a whole bunch of them to show as evidence. So that shouldn't take too long. We'll get into it when that airs. So I may keep you updated. Share this video. It covers a lot of topics, and it covers stuff that I didn't know that were difficult to deal with. Because to be honest, I don't like seeing this stuff. I don't like seeing, for no reason, we're just going to make a picture look like it did when it was taken in black and white in the 30s. This was a much more stressful thing to deal with than I expected. But I learned some things. I had no idea that that was done to the picture. I didn't know who Eisler was. I really was just going off Rass Kass. So share if anybody is ever curious about that. First half of this video covers maybe even less than the first half, but I get to the point pretty quickly compared to Shock Almost.